Hello again, and welcome to another installment of the podcast. Today we'll be talking about a specific year in music and a specific genre. The year is 1991, and the genre is death metal. For me personally, 1991 was a huge year. Basically, changed everything for me musically to this day. I was discovering all kinds of music, but it seemed like the floodgates opened when I found this style of music. So let's just jump right into it. I'll tell you about the bands and the releases from that year and just a little bit of background and what they meant to me. We'll start with a band out of England, Bolt Thrower. We've got Warmaster here. This is my personal favorite from their catalog. They have a lot of good ones, but this was right in the sweet spot of their career. It was after Realm of Chaos, which was a little grindcore-y, but before Fourth Crusade, which was a little slower. But this is just good. It's still fast, but it's got the good mid-paced. The great song Cenotaph is on here. Who doesn't like Bolt Thrower? Everything they do is just so catchy. Next up, again on Earache Records, you've got Carcass, Necroticism, Descanting the Insalubrious. Gem of an album, top 5 album of death metal. 8 songs, 52 minutes. Every riff is gold. Just the songs on here are incredible. They've just grown so much since the previous album, Symphonies of Sickness. But this is before they stripped it down to, the next album, Heartwork, which is like their Black album. But this was their crowning achievement, in my opinion. And Bill Steer still has those low guttural vocals going on. Just a great album. Again, another band from England. Another band on Earache, but this time from Tampa, Florida. You've got Morbid Angel with Blessed Are the Sick. Their first 2 albums are classic. I never know if I like Altars of Madness more or Blessed Are the Sick. They're both different, but they're both awesome. Just all the songs on here. Brainstorm, Rebel Lands, Day of Suffering, the title track, Abominations, The Ancient Ones. Great album. Then you've got Napalm Death, Death by Manipulation. This is a little bit more of a compilation. It's got leftover tracks from the previous lineup that had Bill Steer of Carcass and Lee Dorian of Cathedral by this point in 91, but some leftover recordings from that era of Napalm Death are on here from 89. A few tracks from the Harmony Corruption sessions are on here, but they have 4 tracks that they recorded in 91. Mass Appeal Madness, Pride Assassin, Unchallenged Hate, and Social Sterility. I think the last 2 were reworkings of old stuff from the From Enslavement to Obliteration era. But my favorite sound of Napalm Death is actually those 4 tracks and about the 8 minutes of new songs on here that they recorded in 91. I think Barney's vocals are just monstrous. So Death by Manipulation by Napalm Death. And I point those bands out first. Earache Records had that Grind Crusher tour 2 years prior, and these are the bands: Bolt Thrower, Carcass, Morbid Angel, and Napalm Death. Those are the bands they were showcasing, and here they are 2 years later, and they're just on the rise still. Next up, you've got from Sweden, you've got Entombed, Clandestine. Another perfect album. People love Left Hand Path, and rightfully so. I'm going to go with Clandestine. This is just far better songwriting. Again, much like the Carcass album, just riffs are perfect from beginning to end. They've got that classic buzzsaw Swedish sound that isn't matched by anyone else. So Clandestine, every track. Living Dead, Sinners Bleed, Evil In, Stranger Aeons, Chaos Breed, Crawl, all that stuff. Another band from Tampa, Massacre, From Beyond. Pretty much all you need from this band. I've got this with the bonus tracks from the EP that came out the next year. Just good traditional death metal. It sounds a little bit like, well, the members of this band were pretty much all in death at one point, so pretty much traditional death metal there. And then one more album from Earache here. We've got Cathedral, Forest of Equilibrium, their first album. I'm going to consider it to be death metal. It's incredibly doomy. Some parts are so slow, but so awesome. A Funeral Request is probably my favorite, although Equilibrium, the semi-title track, is great too. I just love the vibe on this album. Okay, next up, I don't know how you can top this. Death, Human, the late Chuck Schuldiner. This, to me, this is Death's easily their best album. They have a lot of good ones, but this is the crowning achievement. He brings in the late Sean Reinert and Paul Masvidal as Cynic on this. You've got the bass extraordinaire Steve DiGiorgio on here. All these tracks are great. Flattening of Emotions, Secret Face, Lack of Comprehension, Vacant Planets. It's great. A band sometimes lumped in with them with Death and Cynic is Atheist, Unquestionable Presence. It's like jazz Death. It's just try to follow the time signatures. It's almost impossible. Mother Man, in Incarnation's Dream, The Formative Years, Brains, just great stuff here too. Okay, moving on to the Roadrunner Records label, and an album that looks a lot like the shirt I'm wearing, Sepultura, Arise. These guys are from Brazil. They recorded this with Scotty Burns at Morrisound Studios in Tampa. Some people say that Sepultura is thrash. I call them a hybrid of thrash and death, and on this album they're definitely as close to death metal. To me, this is the same as Obituary or any of those bands as far as heaviness, death metal guitar tone, gruff vocals, the whole nine yards. My favorite Sepultura album by far, you've got Dead Embryonic Cells. I heard that on Monday Night Metal on KC95 way back in the day. It was like just blown away. I didn't even know what I was hearing, but I knew I needed to find a store nearby and buy the thing. Desperate Cry, Altered State, Under Siege, just great stuff. Another CD that looks kind of like this shirt, Pestilence from the Netherlands, Testimony of the Ancients. Awesome progressive death metal. My favorite work by theirs, a lot of people say Consuming Impulse. I say Testimony of the Ancients because it's just so much more evolved. They got 8 songs, but in between all the 8 songs are these 8 interludes that are like 30 seconds long or so. Very cool album. Some keyboards and things, but just an awesome sound, awesome style. Tony Choi guests on bass on this. He was also the guest bass player on the Atheist album and played in Cynic also at the same time. Another one from Scotty Burns production at Morrisound. You've got Gorguts from Quebec, Canada, Luc Lemay and Company. I love Gorguts. This is not my favorite Gorguts album. The Erosion of Sanity might be that. Plus, they just kept evolving over the years. I totally admire the band, but the charm of their first album is it's got the classic Dan Seagrave artwork. It was recorded, in the famous studio with the famous producer. You've got guest vocals from Chris Barnes. You've got a guest solo from the great James Murphy. Love this CD. Even if it's not my favorite, it's just a classic. Inoculated Life is great. They've got Waste of Mortality, which is a cool instrumental. All kinds of stuff on there. I think Scott Burns did this one too. Another Floridian death metal band. Malevolent Creation. The 10 Commandments. It opens with memorial arrangements, premature burial, multiple stab wounds, thou shalt kill. Just high octane, just awesome death metal. Maybe the most brutal CD we'll introduce so far, Suffocation, Effigy of the Forgotten. These guys are out of New York. Again, produced with Scotty Burns at Morrisound, just super brutal. I remember hearing the drumming and just being like, what? How do you play like that? Frank Mullen on vocals, just totally guttural. Awesome stuff. And last but not least on the Roadrunner stuff, the first Immolation, another band out of the New York area, with Dawn of Possession. Classic album, No Forgiveness Without Bloodshed, Into Everlasting Fire, Those Left Behind. Awesome stuff. Let's see, moving on to, I've got 4 from Century Media. So the first, Tiamat, The Astral Sleep. These guys are from Sweden, but they sound nothing like the other Swedish bands. Most people love 1992's Clouds, which I do too, or 1994's Wild Honey, which is incredible. But I would include this one too as part of that trilogy of the arc of their sound. I just think Mountain of Doom, Dead Boys Choir, Ancient Entity, Angels Far Beyond, just lots of cool atmosphere, pretty good songwriting too. Just a little unusual for some of the more brutal death metal to have some of the dynamics and some of the orchestration and things. So when you're thinking about Tiamat and Clouds and Wild Honey, don't forget The Astral Sleep. Band out of Germany, Morgoth, Cursed. It's pretty standard, traditional death metal. I like it. Nothing too out of the ordinary here. It's just good. It's dark. It's got a good dark vibe to it. Another band from Sweden that doesn't sound like the other bands from Sweden. Unleashed, Where No Life Dwells, their first album. And my favorite from theirs, I like a lot of Unleashed, but I've not heard anything they released after their first that quite is quite as good as the first one. Into Glory Ride, Before the Creation of Time, just classic stuff here. And the last one on Century Media, another band from the Netherlands, Martin van Drunen left Pestilence to get into Asphyx, The Rack, just brutal, ugly, brutal, awesome, Vermin, Diabolical Existence, Wasteland of Terror, The Sickening Dwell, Ode to a Nameless Grave, Pages in Blood. It's awesome. It's just barbaric, but just so effective and awesome. And then lastly, I've got, looks like 5 of these just on different labels. So Metal Blade Records, I've got Cannibal Corpse, Butchered at Birth. This is their second release. Their first one was cool, but they hadn't found their sound. Well, on their second album, they pretty much find their sound. The guitars are just so brutal and saturated, and Chris Barnes has figured out his guttural voice. Love this album. It's between this and Tomb of the Mutilated the next year as to which one's my favorite Cannibal Corpse album. But Vomit the Soul has Glenn Benton of Deicide doing disgusting vocals along with Chris Barnes for the chorus. Incredible. Let's see, Nuclear Blast Records, Dismember's first one, Like an Ever-Flowing Stream. If you like Entombed, you'll like Dismember. They've got that buzzsaw guitar sound. In fact, there was a band before this called Carnage, and they had an album the year before called Dark Recollections, which might have my favorite Swedish guitar buzzsaw tone. But that band splintered apart when Michael Amott left to join Carcass for that Necroticism album. The bass player, Johnny Dordovich, left to join Entombed for Clandestine, although apparently, even though he's in the photo, he's not on the album, actually. And then the other 3 guys that were left from Carnage formed Dismember. Some of those Carnage songs you can find on here, too. Awesome stuff. Again, one of those albums where the first Dismember album is the best Dismember album. I think this was on Peaceville, My Dying Bride. I've got this compilation of EPs, but I'm talking specifically about this one from 91, Symphonaire, in fairness, et Spera Imperium, if you can say that 10 times fast. Just, they came out of nowhere. They've got violins and orchestra to go along with their doomy, sad, heavy sound. Nobody was like them at this stage in the game. Let's see, 2 more here. Okay, Restless Records, band out of England, Cancer. I think the best thing about this is that James Murphy's got solos all over it. It's an okay album. It's pretty cool, and it's certainly from that era of '91. Scott Burns again producing, and again James Murphy at his peak with the soloing. And last but not least, I've got it on a double album, but it's Benediction. This one, The Grand Leveler. So Barney left after this one to join Napalm Death, so they get Dave Ingram. He sounds a lot like Barney. He's definitely competent. So you've got just more classic death metal again out of England this time. So there you have it. One album that I don't have on CD, I have it in the back on cassette, but it was Grave, Into the Grave, another band off Century Media from Sweden. They had that buzzsaw guitar sound too. So again, those are the CDs I have from 1991, and I have those because I believe those to be the best from the genre and the best from the best year of that genre. So hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. See you later.